Brendan lay awake, tangled in his sheets, staring at the ceiling as the minutes crawled toward midnight. Tomorrow would be his 25th birthday, a number that felt heavier than it should. For months, the thought of it had filled him with unease. Sleep refused to come. His thoughts spiraled through regrets, unanswered questions, and a quiet ache he had carried for as long as he could remember. He had always felt misaligned, like a guest living in the wrong body, playing a role that never truly fit. It was a feeling he had learned to bury, but it never disappeared. When the clock struck 12, a gentle radiance bloomed in the room. Brendan bolted upright, his heart pounding. Standing at the foot of his bed was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen, graceful, luminous, with wings that shimmered as if woven from light itself. Who are you?" he whispered. The figure smiled, and warmth washed over him, calming his fear. "I am an angel," it said softly, "and I've come to offer you a choice." A choice? Brendan had never believed in angels, yet this presence felt undeniably real. "A choice?" he repeated, barely able to think. "You have carried a quiet weight for many years," the angel said. "I am here to give you the chance to change the direction of your life." Brendan swallowed. What kind of chance? "There are two paths," the angel explained. "On the first, you may live as the woman you have always felt yourself to be. Your life will be rich, honest, and full of meaning, but it will be brief. You will have only 20 years. His breath caught. 20 years as his true self. The idea glowed like a forbidden miracle. "And the other?" he asked. "You may remain as you are. You will live a long life and see your 80th birthday. But it will be ordinary. You will exist, but you will never truly feel whole." The silence that followed felt crushing. Brendan closed his eyes, torn between authenticity and time, between a blazing truth and a long, quiet compromise. Finally, he spoke. "I choose to stay as I am." His voice shook. "A long life, maybe I can make peace with it." The angel studied him for a moment, its expression impossible to read. "Very well," it said. "Your choice is sealed." In a sudden flash, the light vanished. The room returned to darkness, leaving Brendan alone with the echo of what might have been. Years passed. Life moved forward, steady and predictable. Brendan built a career in accounting, finding comfort in routines and numbers that always made sense. His weekends were filled with familiar rituals, televised games, casual conversations, surface-level friendships. He was present, yet always slightly apart. On his 40th birthday, Brendan sat alone in his apartment. A small cake rested on the table, one slice missing. Candlelight flickered against the walls as he watched the flames dance. The weight of that long-ago decision pressed down on him with renewed force. "Was it worth it?" he whispered. Wax dripped slowly down a candle's side. He thought of the other life, the shorter one, the truer one, and all the years he had traded for safety. The unanswered what-ifs crept in, as they always did when the room was quiet. When he finally leaned forward and blew out the candles, he made a wish, not for joy, not for success, but for clarity. To finally understand himself, of where he belonged in the world and the road he had committed himself to walking. Time moved forward without asking his permission. Brendan eventually married, not out of passion, but practicality. Linda was gentle, dependable, and perceptive enough to sense the quiet distance Brendan maintained, even with those closest to him. She never pushed, but she noticed. They built a family together. A son, then a daughter. Brendan loved his children deeply, fiercely even, yet there was always a subtle gap he couldn't explain, like he was loving them through a pane of glass, present but slightly removed. On his 60th birthday, the house was full of laughter. Family crowded the living room as Brendan smiled on cue, unwrapped presents, and sliced into the cake. When his daughter, now nearly grown, wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "I love you, Dad," his chest tightened painfully. "I love you too," he said, meaning it more than she could ever know. Still, a question lingered quietly in his mind. Who might I have been to them, if I had chosen differently? Later that evening, after the guests departed and the noise faded, Brendan stood alone on the back porch, gazing up at a sky scattered with stars. The years he had lived, and the life he hadn't, rested heavily on him. "Everything okay?" Linda asked softly, stepping outside. Brendan turned and offered a faint smile. "Just thinking." She studied him with familiar understanding. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" For a fleeting moment, he almost did. The angel. The choice. The lifelong feeling of being miscast in his own body. But the words tangled inside him, refusing to come free. "I know," he said instead. Linda squeezed his hand before returning inside, leaving him alone once more with the quiet truth he had never voiced. The decades continued their steady march. Brendan watched his children graduate, move away, fall in love. He held his grandchildren for the first time, marveling at their tiny hands, their newness, their unburdened beginnings. On the night before his 79th birthday, Brendan sat in his favorite chair with an old photo album resting on his knees. His fingers paused over a picture taken just days after his 25th birthday. The young man in the photograph looked uncertain, eyes already shadowed with questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. "Was it worth it?" Brendan murmured to the empty room. As if summoned by the question, a familiar glow filled the space. Soft, radiant, unmistakable. Brendan's breath caught as the angel appeared before him, unchanged by time. "You," Brendan whispered, tears rising. The angel smiled gently. "Hello, Brendan. It has been a long journey." "I lived the life I chose," Brendan said hoarsely. "But I don't know if it was the life I wanted." "You built a family," the angel replied. "You loved and were loved." "Yes," Brendan said, looking down at the album. "But I always felt like I was watching my life instead of living it. Like I never truly stepped into myself." The angel nodded. "And if you could choose again?" Brendan closed his eyes. 20 years. Brief, but honest. "I don't know," he admitted. "I wouldn't trade my family away. But I've always wondered." "There was no wrong path," the angel said softly. "Only different truths." "Will I ever feel whole?" Brendan asked. "That depends," the angel replied, reaching out with a warm, steady touch. "It is never too late to live honestly. The choice has always remained." The light faded, leaving Brendan alone once more. As sleep slowly claimed him, he made a promise, to stop hiding, to honor the truth he had buried for so long. But somewhere beyond this life, another possibility existed. In that other reality, Brendan lifted his head and met the angel's gaze with steady resolve. "I choose to live as who I truly am," he said. "Even if my time is short." The angel smiled. "Then your life begins now." Light exploded around him. Warmth coursed through his body, reshaping, awakening. When Brendan opened his eyes, he stared into the mirror and gasped. A young woman stared back. Long auburn hair. Bright green eyes. A face that felt achingly familiar. "This is me," she whispered. "This has always been me." As the sun rose on her 25th birthday, Brendan, now Evelyn, stepped into the world reborn. Everything felt sharper, clearer, alive. For the first time, her reflection matched her soul. The months that followed were filled with courage and discovery. Evelyn shared her truth with friends and family, met with mixed reactions, but also unexpected love. Her parents struggled at first, but time softened their fear into understanding. She left behind her lifeless career in finance and followed the pull she had ignored for years, art. Her paintings burst with color and emotion, drawing attention across the local scene. At her first gallery exhibition, she met Michael. He stood quietly before one of her pieces, eyes thoughtful. When Evelyn asked what he thought, he smiled warmly. "It feels like someone finally told the truth," he said. They talked until the gallery lights dimmed. And from that night on, something beautiful began. Michael supported her fully, through challenges, milestones, and quiet victories. 1 year later, walking along the shoreline, he dropped to one knee. "You've brought light into my life," he said. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered, tears streaming freely. Their wedding was intimate and radiant. As Evelyn stood beside Michael in her white gown, she caught sight of her parents, watching with pride, love shining in their eyes. And for the first time, Evelyn knew without doubt. No matter how long her life would be, it was finally, truly hers. Evelyn's paintings began appearing in galleries far beyond her hometown, first across the state, then across the country. Critics praised the emotional honesty in her work, the way each canvas seemed to breathe with lived experience. She and Michael opened their home to 2 children, a brother and sister they adopted after years in the foster system. Their laughter filled every corner of the house, grounding Evelyn in a joy she had never imagined she could feel. Yet as her 40th birthday drew closer, Evelyn felt an unshakable urgency. She had always known her time was finite. Rather than fear it, she chose to honor it. She poured herself into service, volunteering at shelters, visiting schools, and speaking openly about identity, courage, and self-acceptance. She spoke not as a symbol, but as a human being who had once been afraid. Her sincerity reached people in ways statistics and slogans never could. At 42, everything changed. A small lump, a doctor's visit, then words that fell like stones: aggressive breast cancer. Sitting in the examination room, Michael's hand clasped tightly in hers, Evelyn remembered the angel's promise, a life rich, but brief. "We'll fight," Michael said, his voice trembling. "Every treatment, every chance." Evelyn smiled softly and touched his cheek. "We will," she said. "And no matter what happens, these years have been everything. I wouldn't trade them for 100 more lived any other way." The next 3 years were relentless. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgeries, loss and exhaustion. Yet even in pain, Evelyn found beauty. In a sunrise through the window, in her children's laughter, in the simple act of painting when her strength allowed. As her 45th birthday approached, Evelyn knew the fight was nearing its end. She gathered those she loved most: Michael, their children, her parents, and a handful of close friends. "I've lived more in 20 years than some people do in 80, she said, her voice weak but certain. "I loved honestly. I created freely. I lived as myself. Don't grieve for me. Celebrate what we shared." In her final weeks, Evelyn completed one last painting, a self-portrait unlike any before it. It didn't just capture her face, it captured her spirit. The woman on the canvas glowed with peace, surrounded by color that seemed to move and breathe. On the morning of her 45th birthday, Evelyn passed quietly in her sleep. Michael held her hand until the very end. News of her death spread quickly, followed by a wave of grief and gratitude. At her memorial, the church overflowed. Her artwork lined the walls, silent witnesses to a life fully lived. Michael stood at the podium, their children beside him. "Evelyn taught us how to be brave," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "She showed us how to love without hiding, and how to find beauty even in pain. Her life may have been short, but its meaning was endless." Afterward, people lingered, sharing stories. A young trans woman spoke of finding courage through Evelyn's journey. An older man thanked her for kindness that had carried him through loss. Fellow artists remembered her generosity and mentorship. In the years that followed, Evelyn's legacy only grew. Her paintings continued to travel the world. A scholarship in her name was established at the community center where she had volunteered, helping young artists chase their dreams. Michael never remarried. He carried Evelyn with him always, raising their children with stories of her courage, humor, and boundless compassion. On what would have been Evelyn's 50th birthday, Michael sat alone in her old studio. He picked up a framed photo, a selfie she had taken on her 25th birthday, the first day she had lived openly as herself. Her smile was radiant, her eyes bright with possibility. "You were right," Michael whispered. "It was never about how long, it was about how deeply." A warm breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of lilacs, her favorite. For a moment, he could almost feel her presence. Any lingering doubt vanished. Evelyn had lived truthfully, loved completely, and left the world better than she found it. Her story continued long after she was gone. Books were written, documentaries filmed. Young people struggling with identity found hope in her journey. In the art world, her work reached new heights. Museums hosted retrospectives. Critics dissected her use of color and emotion. But it was the personal stories, the quiet ones, that mattered most. On what would have been her 60th birthday, a major New York gallery held a special exhibition of her work. Michael, now in his 70s, attended with their children and grandchild. One painting stopped him cold, a figure standing at a crossroads, surrounded by swirling color. In the corner, almost hidden, was a tiny angel. "I don't remember this one," his daughter said softly. Michael smiled, a bittersweet ache in his chest. "Neither do I. It must have been one of her last." A young woman approached them hesitantly, tears in her eyes. "Are you Evelyn's family?" Michael nodded. "I'm her husband." The woman took a shaky breath. "Her story saved my life. I was terrified to be myself. But learning about her, seeing her art, it gave me the courage to live." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you." She would have loved knowing that. As the woman walked away, Michael turned back to the painting. "You're still changing lives," he whispered. And in that moment, he knew, Evelyn's life, though brief, had been a masterpiece.